Our guest today is Tim Smit. Tim was born in Holland and educated in England. He went to the University of Durham to study anthropology and archaeology, and then spent some time in the northeast as an archaeologist. Since then, his career has taken him to music, and then as founder and director of the Eden Project in Cornwall. Tim, when you look at your own education, educated I think in the south of England in private education, private school, it looks like a fairly traditional form of education. Was it like that? I mean, did you enjoy it? Has it determined what sort of man you've become? Do you think back about it with affection?
I loathed it. I absolutely loathed it, but that wasn't because of the schools. It was because of the attitudes which at that time were expressed. I mean, we're talking about the 60s through till, I don't know, mid to late 60s, when it was still incredibly class-based and people were... It was quite a cruel sort of place. And I was big, so I could play rugby and all that sort of stuff, so I fitted in. But I think my Dutch roots, my sort of, if you like, socialist sort of credentials felt rather bruised by the experience. But it taught me that I never wanted to send my own children to private education, so I felt that I got benefit from it that way.
And you stuck at it. You went to Durham, did archaeology, did anthropology, and then got a job that used your degree. So, because one of the questions I was going to ask you was that when you then went into music and then eventually down to Cornwall and the Eden Project, was that sort of rebelliousness kicking over the traces of those early years schooling? Well, why don't you stick at archaeology?
I would have. The hot summer of 1976 was when I qualified. I would still be doing it today if the pay had been okay, but the pay was so bad. And I had a rock band and we were playing the local hops and things. And I was earning more in a night than I was in a week at the Bowes Museum. I thought I thought I'd chance my arm, do music, and then I'd perhaps go back to archaeology, but as it happens, I haven't. But maybe the Lost Gardens of Heligan was a form of archaeology. Maybe.
I was actually going to say, if you actually look at where you are now in the Heligan and compared to that, you can see the link. But you were successful in music. It wasn't something you weren't a drifter at that time. You were very successful in what you did. You had a very successful career in music.
Yeah, no, I was very, very fortunate. Well, we just struck lucky. We worked with a couple of acts, had a couple of record deals, then we had some hits, and then made some money, and I was flying all over the world. And I hate flying, so it was eventually that got me out of the music industry, because when you end up having a scotch at 9 o'clock in the morning to get on a plane, you realise that's not good for your health.
It's not a way you want to spend your time.
No, but that kind of showbiz background is actually really helpful when you then move into something more formal, like garden restoration or education, because you realise that some of the showboating is actually quite a helpful way of highlighting things to make things more interesting, to make people engage.
Yeah. But the other thing that struck me is what you've done in each of you. You've had a number of careers so far. Is that you've been a risk taker. You've been an innovator. What drove you to make those decisions? It's not a career path that many people take.
No, it isn't. But the trouble with success is that people then, in hindsight, think that you were destined to go down a particular route. If they only saw the razor blade difference between success and failure, and the fact, I put my house on the line 3 times, and there were times when I thought I was going to lose everything.
So what's the join between the music industry and Cornwall?
To be honest, I fell out with working with lots of prima donnas, and I decided I was going to go into film music and build a studio in Cornwall. The decision for Cornwall was completely random. I was on holiday there and saw a house I liked. I hadn't even really thought about how far away it was from London. My wife and I talked, and I said, look, if we can sell our house in London in 48 hours, I'll move. And we did.
Wow.
So we ended up in Cornwall without actually really much of an idea of what we'd do.
So you didn't have the projects in mind at that point?
No, not at all. It was a complete sort of leap.
Right.
And then I met a guy who had inherited this estate, which was called Heligan, and he didn't have any money, and he said, would I like to see it as an archaeologist? Because we started talking at a party, and he invited me to go and see it, and we cut our way around it. And I fell in love with it, and that day decided to give up the music business. And just did it. But I've always done that. I've always trusted my instincts.
I read something about your own description of yourself as an environmentalist, and I think it said, or somebody said of you, that you're not a sandals and nut cutlets sort of environmentalist. So what kind of environmentalist does that make you?
I was very heavily influenced by a man called Richard Sambrook, who set up Friends of the Earth with Jonathan Porritt, and then went on to become a leading light at the International Institute of Environment and Development after Barbara Ward was there. And Richard and I became firm friends. He taught me a number of things. Number one was that when you become older in life, do not succumb to this myth that you make your best friends when you're young, because if you leave yourself open to making friends later on, it's so rewarding, which I thought was a terrific thing. And the other thing he said, I saw him talk to an audience once where he said, who here would like to see fresh drinking water available to everyone on earth? And everybody put their hands up. And he said, those marvellous charities like WaterAid and whatever, who here believes they can do that? And no one put their hands up. He then leant forward and he said, the problem with all of you, is that you want to be seen to be a person who changes the world, but you don't actually want to change the world. Because if you really wanted to do it, you would know that the only people capable of it have got names you can hardly bear to pronounce, like Mobil, BP, Shell, and the real world, the real innovation of the next generation, our generation now, is going to be to realize that those attributes of business, if you could harness them to the attitude to development, that's where the secret lies. And I found that totally inspirational, and that's where my head is in terms of breaking down barriers, the demonization of business, or in fact the, if you like, the hippieing of NGOs. There's some very, very good people in both. And I think you probably have noticed this as much as I, that within business today, there's, over the last 18 months, 2 years, there's a big change, a real big change. A lot of the people in business actually want to make a difference. The fact that they're in a business is not the point. They're individuals, they want to make a difference. And I think we're living in very exciting times because of it. If you look back at this period, this actual period, the next 10 years, from 300 years hence, I think you will see a moment which will be equated in terms of historical importance to the Reformation or the start of the Renaissance. I really do.
What the tipping point has been reached,
I think we've reached it.
That.
I think we're about to change. I think our whole attitude to business is going to change, the way new companies develop through social enterprise and what have you, and our whole approach to costing, if you like, what were the free services of nature will change.
Right. Okay, let's just look at the work that you're doing in Cornwall now. You're at the Heligan and now at the Eden Project. Let's concentrate on the Eden Project. How did you get into it? When you started it, how did you think it would turn out? I mean, it's now, you know, acclaimed throughout the world. Was that your ambition?
To be honest, yeah. We had to write business plans and things for the bankers and for the civil servants who were going to make the decision. And we were very cautious because we knew if we overclaimed, they wouldn't believe us. So we said we'd have 500,000 visitors. But to be honest, I always believed we'd get 1 million plus.
Yeah.
To be honest, it sounds awfully arrogant. I wanted to build the Taj Mahal of the environment movement. I wanted to build a place that people would stop looking at environmentalists as if somehow we were jolly nice, you know, to have around to dinner and to have a bit of a conscience, but not capable of doing something. And I realised that being able to, you know, trade punches with the so-called big boys and build something really beautiful and totally fit for purpose was a really important statement that the environment movement had changed.
Well, I want to come on and talk to you a little bit about what you do and your education projects at Eden, but how central was education to the planning of the project?
Education was totally central. I've always loved teachers. I mean, I think if the most valuable thing in your life is a child and you entrust them to a person, surely that person should be the most valued person in society, and I really hold to that. I wanted to see how we could make subjects which, in our case, the environment, but in its widest sense, including livelihood, how we could bring it to life in such a way that it was effortless, so that people wouldn't think of it as being taught, they would see it as being part of understanding the world around them. So we kind of styled ourselves the world's first rock and roll scientific foundation. We're very tongue-in-cheek, of course, but we wanted to make sure we used no jargon, as little Latin as possible, and made people laugh a lot. And we did lots of tests. One of the great things about having that many visitors and a big site is that we can try things out. Like we set scientists to compete against artists to see whether they can get a message across. And at Eden, the first thing I needed to get across was that without plants, there's no life on Earth. And most people, you say that and they go, yeah, but how do you convey that? And we had these artists compete with our scientific team. And when all the kids came in, they walked straight past what the scientists had done, you know, lots of boards with pictures of leaves and photosynthesis. And the winning artist had actually done a Heath Robinson model with the music of Elvis doing Wooden Heart. And there was a man and a woman and a child and a dog and a cat and a breakfast scene. And over a period of 3 minutes, everything that was made from plants disappeared from this tableau vivant. Right. And then the mum and dad turned around and their clothes came off and they were absolutely naked, which made everybody laugh. And it finished with the cat, the milk disappearing, it falling out and its eyes popping out. So everybody called it Dead Cat. Yeah. But everybody who goes to Eden leaves knowing that without plants there's no life on Earth. Yeah. And that set us on a course, really, of realising that you could be funny about these things. And the big establishments, the big institutions were very sceptical about Eden to start with. You know, our friends, now friends at Kew and
the respectable.
And yes, and Natural History Museum. A lot of scientists worry about the way their peer group regard them. and think they might be, it's a horrid phrase, dumbing down, but they may be being over simplistic. Simplistic is a good word. And I think when we started to get those big visitor numbers, they started to come and think, well, actually, maybe there is something going on here. And it's quite noticeable throughout the country now. There's a lot more light, if you like, introductory, dip your toe into the water stuff going on, isn't there?
Yeah. See, I think one of the interesting things is what this tells us about what's going on in schools. I mean, and there's two ways of looking at what you're doing at Eden. Right, we've got what goes on in schools, which is a type of learning not similar to that which you've just described goes on at Eden. And you can see Eden as being something that's an adjunct. You go there for a day and you have this marvellous experience and you relate it at school. But there's the wider and I think more interesting discussion about what can schools learn from what you do at Eden in terms of how they teach children. I'm not quite sure where you would stand on that. I know you don't want to be critical of schools because I know you hold teachers and schools in very high regard. But sometimes do you think to yourself, well, if I can do this at Eden with these children, why can't schools be as adventurous and creative in their classrooms? And is that a debate that needs to be had?
It is a debate that needs to be had, but to be honest, if I was in a position of genuine power, and of course power in a democracy is terribly difficult, isn't it? But if I was an autocrat, I would actually change the whole bias of the country and make education the number one thing, but in a way that we actually ask, in a very grown-up way, what do we want out of this? And I think there's an awful lot that can be achieved if you set yourself a target of creating I think you might refer to it almost as a baccalaureate type attitude, a wide polymathic experience. Because I don't see how anybody can make the best of life after school if they haven't had a polymathic induction into all the pleasures of learning across a wide area of things. And I know it's very middle class, but I think Alan Bennett's The History Boys is about as good as it gets in terms of demonstrating the difference. And I think almost any teacher watching that would have smiled, in recognition at that battleground between...
They've heard the dialogue, they've heard those arguments and the stuff.
And I wouldn't start from a point of view of being critical. I would just put the word delight into education. Because on the back of Richard Dawkins' book, The Selfish Gene, is a review from an unnamed critic from The Observer, which said, I loved this book, it made me feel so damn clever. And that's what great education should be about, that act of revelation which sends a shiver up the back of your spine.
And you do some work with teachers as well. I mean, as well as courses for children, you have courses for teachers. Is that what you're trying to achieve with them? Are you sort of almost like a professional development opportunity for teachers? And how much do you feel you've got this mission that when teachers leave you and go back to their schools in inner city London or rural Cumbria, that somehow they're teaching in a different way because of what they've experienced with you?
Well, it's part mission, part therapy group, in truth.
You bring the two together, I suppose you do quite well.
Well, we show them what we do. I mean, we do a number of things, as you know, that are very experiential. I mean, we do two particular things which are very smiley. We do...